And then,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, kind of seeing that what's happening within the communities, from the individual level to the neighborhood level to the community, really trying to build some coordination and collaboration there as well, so that we can kind of make this cohesive shared responsibility for our own fire safety.
Yeah, and I echo a lot of what she said. I'm just trying to see ourselves as a bridge, a resource, a way to say, well, we know this is coming up. We know there's going to be, trees being taken out behind your property in 6 months. And this is ways to give you the information that we would have, or I would have in that up in Mono County, to alert the communities to what's going on, and ask if people want to get involved, give ideas about what to do, seek out information from everybody, see what you are all thinking about your properties and what you think needs to be done. So that's how I kind of see the position, is really going out and really getting engaged with everybody in the community who's interested at all.
What
And
about,
running kind of, not interference, but just being a liaison in between that.
so what about areas you're concerned about that goes on to DWP land, or it's DWP's land?
Yeah.
Are you going to liaison with them to get them to
Yeah.
clear the riparian?
Every
corridor?
agency that's outside of the community, from CAL FIRE to DWP to the Forest Service to the BLM to this, state, and yeah, that's kind of like kind of the spider web, in the center, and you're like, okay, here's all the radiating pieces that go out. But the big emphasis is really on making every community as fire resilient and as safe from fire as possible. So that's the absolute bottom line. That's what you would say, right? Is that's what we're really here for. So to give you the tools to do that, the funding to do it.
Yep, and there's a lot of great ways to get involved. So come see us and we'll get you linked up with any sort of fire safe councils, or ways we can kind of build some good collaborative work in your neighborhood. So
Or start a fire safe council if you're interested. Pick up the phone. So
thanks. And then we'd like to turn it over to Jeff Griffiths. He's our Inyo County 2nd District Supervisor. Kind of give another little spiel.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks everybody out there in internet land. This has been a while coming. We've been planning this, but it's an amazing collaboration. We have Inyo County, Mono County, University of California. The tribe is here, and the field day tomorrow will be on tribal land, the Bishop Paiute tribe. So this is really an important topic, where there's fire is on our minds a lot, maybe not as much now because we just had the most rain that we've had in a very long time. But now is the time to prepare your home for the coming fire season. And we've stepped up a lot of work on the county level, on the state level, and federal level with vegetation management, forest management, trying to reduce the severity of wildfires. But to be honest, that process is going to take 50 to 100 years and maybe never be done. So we're going to be living with fire from here on out. And I think a really important key that has been growing in momentum in the last a decade or so has been what you can do in your own home to reduce the vegetation around it, to make your home safer, and then how to harden your home. And it sounds intimidating, but there's some really easy steps that you can do. And the collaboration that we have right here with the Master Gardeners and with the California Native Plant Society, thank you for hosting this, is we can train the trainers. The more we can get this education out there, the more people can share it with their neighbors and dramatically improve the survivability of your home when that wildfire comes. So we're happy to welcome Yana Valachovic. Yana, she spoke at our Citizens Wildfire Academy, I don't know, 6 months ago or something like that, and then spoke with the Master Gardeners. And Yana is the county director and the forest advisor for Humboldt and Del Norte counties. She has a master's in forestry from Oregon State University. She is a registered professional forester. And she has a list of publications longer than my arm about sudden oak death and redwood ecosystems, and importantly to the topic of today, in home hardening and fire survivability. And everybody sort of has this idea of like maybe what they're going to do when the fire comes through. What happens if it comes through at 3 o'clock in the morning on a middle of the January day when your hose is frozen, and or perhaps it's when you're not home. Fires don't strike at convenient times. So there's things that you can do to make your home safer and your neighbor's home safer and your entire community safer. So let's give a big warm welcome to Yana, and she's a coveted speaker, so let's take advantage of it.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to set my PowerPoint up here for a second, so let me scooch down. See if I can remember how to walk and talk and chew gum at the same time. Always tricky. Thank you, Jeff, for that kind introduction. Great. Excellent. Well, what has brought you here tonight? I want to know that. Why are you here? I know you're members of the Native Plant Society. Some of you got cajoled into being here. What strikes your interest in this topic? It's the middle of winter. We did just have a fire on Monday in this community. So what brings you here? What do you want to know?
For us, I think our fire season starts in February. That's when we've had our big fire, so it's coming very soon.
Right. So fire season's coming. What is the fire season in California?
All year. Yeah.
Right. It's kind of all year. We sort of get this sense that, well, we live in a Mediterranean climate, and so, well, there should be these defined periods of dry and wet, but it hasn't really been that way lately, has it? No. Well, what I want to talk about is reasons for hope, because I find most people just feel sort of overwhelmed by these issues. Like, you know that we've lost 43,000 structures in the last 10 years in California. 1 out of every 10 acres in California has burned in the last 10 years. How do we get ourselves out of this situation, right? And, what are those achievable tools that we can use to try and make some progress in that space? So what I hope to do tonight is elicit some interest, provide some evidence for a pathway forward, answer some of your questions, if I may, and hopefully at least plant some seeds of ideas. Because there are things that you can do, there's things that your neighbors can do, and everyone has something to bring to the table. You don't have to be the handiest person in the world. You don't have to be, skilled in everything. We all have some talent. We all have something to offer. So I hope tonight, through this quasi virtual and in-person session, we can explore some of those topics. Oh, I can't see. So a little bit about me. I'm gonna figure this out. Dustin, can you help me for a second? I don't know why it just stopped working. I just thought I'd share. I hail from the North Coast. I hail from the woods, and I'm as deeply rural as they get. And that's the little cabin in the woods that I was raised in. So I thought I'd just give some perspective. I know you all live in this great world of really luscious blues and browns and yellows. And I got more batteries here. So I'm going to stall for a second. Let's see. This is always the fun part while you give a talk, then you do IT at the same time and try and make it work. We'll figure it out. I can do that. Okay. So it's a little bit about my landscape. It's quite green, a little bit different in color. And that is what I replaced my family's cabin in the woods with. So I have some interest in how we design buildings. I'm really quite interested in how buildings learn, how we learn in that space, and how we think about the evolution of a building and what it needs to be. How many of you live in a building that's more than 50 years old? Right? How many have taken down walls, changed the configuration, modified it to meet our needs? when we built that building and we modified it under a different climatic framework and under a different set of risks. So now it's sort of the next level of evolution where we start to think about the exterior side of that building and help move it and change it in a way that it protects us, it nurtures us, it cares for us, it does all the right things. It's just really not being. It was just. There we go. So it got knocked out. So
None of your slides are forwarding on the Zoom for some reason.
they are not.
Not moving forward.
Are you sure?
Yeah, we're getting
Got
chat
chat that
messages
says
that
it's not forwarding on Zoom.
This is the fun of trying to do hybrid events, right? It's like you make it work on every front because it is working on this side.
Is this what Zoom is saying?
It could be that the.
no, this is what people out there
Oh,
are
are
saying.
saying-
Your slide, we aren't seeing the slide.
So just talking out loud for a second while I stall for a second here, it could be that there's low bandwidth and it's not advancing very quickly because it's fine on my end.
It absolutely looks right over here.
So so there could be a delay coming on the other side.
It said the internet connection's unstable, so it's not happy with that.
Right. So that is set up with, it's on our room. I will do my best for those that are online to try and talk through, but not take too long. Yes, so another thing each one of you can do is turn off your cameras. That'll reduce the bandwidth that is being drawn in the space. I'm assuming you can still hear my audio. Okay. So what I'm particularly interested in is trying to figure out when you have a wildfire, why do some buildings survive and some buildings do not? So this is an image from Boulder, Colorado, from the Marshall Fire that took place about a year ago to date, and reminds me very much of where we are tonight in Bishop County, or in Bishop in Inyo County. It's really on the backside of the mountain range, and it just really has that same feeling. The kind of winds that we've experienced over the last several days are very reminiscent of that. So the wildfire that happened on Sunday night, do you know what ignited that wildfire?
Where was it?
In Lone Pine.
Oh, okay.
So it came down. It started because of power lines that came down. The majority of fires that we've had large losses.
Camera pointed at the screen.
Oh yeah, you could do that.
Oh,
Actually, all you have to do is just spin it.
You may have to back up. Somebody tell me if that works.
yeah. No, it'd be better if you centered it behind the chair or something.
It's kind of like starting a song or a dance and then you stop and then you start over again. It never quite feels right, but we'll get there.
You can move it up a little.
Oh. There we go.
Okay.
All right, okay, take 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went to Boulder, Colorado last year because I was really interested in understanding that wildfire. So that wildfire is not ignited by power lines. It's still, the cause is unknown, but it's ignited during a time period on December 30th. It blows, it moves in the wind for 12 hours with up to 110 mile-an-hour gusts. It takes out 1,000 homes in that process, and it's put out because the wind stops and because it snows. But we know that some homes live, some homes survive, some homes are taken out. And so here's just an illustration of that transitional point. So as a researcher, I'm particularly interested in trying to understand, well, was there something different about the construction in the homes that are standing versus the ones that were lost? And is there some lesson that we can learn from that we can understand how to apply that in our own landscapes? We also know that we have new construction codes in California. So some of my work has been trying to figure out how well do those construction codes work for wildfire protection. So what I'm going to do today is sort of detangle some of that and explain what we know and what happens in that space. So I'm curious, how are you all thinking about wildfire and what are some of your preparation techniques that you're doing? Anyone want to share? I'm gonna try and keep this exciting. It's after, it's after dinner. It's dark. Like, come on. Gotta keep this alive. Anybody doing anything? What are you doing, Wendy?
Well, I live in a condo, so there's not that much other than calling the fire
Yeah, that's
department.
what I was trying to see. If I could do that.
Come,
Okay.
Can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, I could do that. Yep. The only thing is it's gonna be in reverse. The words. We'll do the photo. Okay, so Wendy lives in a condo, and so she's in a situation where her preparation is really by working with the association that manages that condo and thinking about alerts and evacuations, communication, what to do under.
I can fix the reverse thing.
Oh,
No,
good.
it's already fixed. It's working.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, that was easy.
So we remodeled the
Okay.
whole outside of the house's party board.
Okay,
And then we thinned the slope behind our house to like a 20% cover something.
okay, so the woman in the front of the room just talked about changing her siding to make it more resistant to fire, using a fiber cement siding and doing a lot of vegetation clearance around the house. That's great.
I
Terrific.
put tiny screens over my soffit vents and the turbines,
Okay.
so it won't suck in the embers.
Okay, so another comment was about improving the screen so that they can resist burning bits of debris. We call those embers from penetrating the house. They're all excellent points. All right.
I moved the wood pile away from my house.
Oh, move the wood pile. Excellent. Excellent.
We do constant invasive weed removal.
Mm.
It's, the tumbleweeds and cheatgrass are so flammable.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's a lot of maintenance, isn't it?
yeah.
This is not a destiny action. It's definitely a journey. You know what I mean by that, right? It's not like you hit some utopian place where everything's perfect and you're there. Like there's a constant activity in trying to achieve what we're going to do. So what I want to do tonight is sort of think about the prioritization of that process, inspire you a little bit, and help work through some of these issues. Oh, but now, no, we can't do that because then I can't.
I could sit and push your button.
Wait, give me a second here. You guys are really challenging me. I just got to say, this was really a rough one. Really a rough one.
Like to get our money's worth.
Yeah. Hold on. Hold on. Why? This is crazy. I feel like I'm losing my mind.
That's totally frozen your computer.
Oh, there we go.
Change.
Well, oh. That's what's happening. You have no idea how confusing this is to my brain right now.
You're doing great.
No, I'm not, but there we go. Okay. All right. Given that choppy, rocky intro here, so now we're going to talk about what we're going to do tonight. So I'm going to provide some background around fire and how homes and structures are exposed to fire. I want to provide some information from two examples. The Paradise Fire, which happened in Northern California, and then the one I talked about in Colorado just a moment ago. And then I'm going to go through some of the high points around these sort of terms we hear around defensible space and structure hardening, and then talked about some prioritization, leaving chance for questions, leaving chance for lots of interaction, to kind of keep it lively. What did Smokey the Bear tell us?
Only you.
Prevent wildfire, and mostly he was saying only you can prevent forest fire, right? And it was always about this wall of flames coming through the forest, right? He never showed pictures of what looks like a hailstorm of burning debris, did he? We never thought about that. It was always this idea that the forest is dangerous, gonna kill all the animals, and there's gonna be these flames that are gonna come and eat us up, right? We're really stuck and we're really culturally ingrained in that idea that fires are about forest fires and they're really about these big flame fronts. It's a component of it, but the part where we lose the most homes is really from the wind distribution of small debris we call embers. They can also be called firebrands. So this is a picture from the campfire in Paradise, and they're kind of everywhere, aren't they? They're collecting at the base of the car, they're smashing into the building. Does that look pleasant? No, not at all. Thank God we all wear masks now. I mean, that's why it's covered in them. But embers have been culprits that have been causing these mysteries over the years. So here's an example from South Lake Tahoe and the Angora fire in 2007. And what do we see here but a bunch of green vegetation in a home that was lost? So was that a fire from inside the house? Maybe. This is the Angora fire. It's actually a wildfire. And so something else happened. And what happened in this situation is an alien came down and took out the house. No, the alien didn't do it. But those tiny bits of debris either found an open window, or they found a cat door, or they found a vent and a way into the house, or they landed on some vegetation right next to the house and created a fire adjacent to the building, or they landed on the deck and ignited something on the deck. And so it looks like the home burned without a wildfire around it. But in fact, it was that distribution, that long distribution of debris that created that situation. This photo from the LA Times, to me is so telling. So we know that embers can move long distance. And when the first thing they do is they smash into the walls of a building, and then they fall to the ground. So see all the fires right at the base of the wall there? They also swirl. So look at the eddy currents, and you can see the swirling that's happening here as well as by the door. So in that kind of vortexing of air currents, they're able to move that debris all over the place, and that's how it enters into the under eave vents and some of the places that seem sort of out of the way and protected. So if you look at your house now and you look at where the leaves collect and the debris collects, that's where the embers are going to go as well. Should we have firefighters spending their time doing this kind of stuff? It's kind of silly in my mind that, you know, we've overplanted this adjacent area and created all this fuel right next to the house that we're having to manage and mitigate. And we know that when we get big events, there's just not enough resources. You know, our focus is really on life and trying to get people evacuated, and not so much on structure protection, because that is down the list of the importance, right? Life comes first. So there are things that we can do to help the fire professionals in this kind of situation. So coming back to that kind of paradigm issue and that kind of cultural issue we have around wildfire, here are some of our graphics that were produced at the state level in 2006. So what we see is defensible space is important. We talk about two zones, the first 30 feet and then 30 to 100. And what landscape are we in? We're in a forest setting, right? And you know, the action is really about trying to prevent the wildfire from coming from the forest towards the house. And really what it was about was creating, in my mind, a defendable space. This idea that you have flames in the canopy, they lay down, you have less fuel overall, so the flame heights are manageable, and you're able to put an engine and personnel to defend the home, creating a safe space for them to defend the home. And that's great and all, but it doesn't really address this issue where you've got long distance transport of embers that can bypass that fuel reduction activity. So under average fire conditions where you have flame that is coming towards you and it is at a manageable level, this defensible space stuff that we've typically talked about for the last several decades works just fine. But when we have a condition where we've got the long distance transport of embers, we need something else. So much is changing in California around how we talk about fire and how the language of fire, and then also sort of the preparation standards. So what I want to introduce are three forms of vocabulary. Maybe it's a little nerdy and wonky, but it's important, I think, to understand the vulnerabilities that each of these issues present, and then how do we mitigate those. So in the forest fire concept, we're talking about direct flame contact, this idea that flame comes towards the house. And you can mitigate that by reducing the fuels overall, the vegetation, the debris that we collect, the wood piles, and so that it's not just going to take a direct run to the house. And there's this other concept of embers, which we've been going over. And so embers, land on the building, land in the building, penetrate the building, land on the adjacent material to the building, and find a place to create spot fires. So if we start thinking about how do we manage for embers, that takes a slightly different approach, doesn't it? The third wonky science term here is something called radiant heat. How many of you have a wood stove? Yeah, most of us. Anyone ever tried to dry their socks by the wood stove and they got a little hot because you put them a little too close and then they start going from steaming to sort of smoldering? Sort of same concept, right? The socks weren't touching the wood stove, but there was enough heat from the wood stove to the socks that you might have crossed that line. So if you get a lot of heat in an adjacent building or in vegetation, you can have a huge heat load which will be pushed against the house. And the first thing to fail in that situation is typically a window. And so if you create a new opening, then the embers can come in, other flames can come in, and you have another way to penetrate the house. So managing the bigger structures, the things that are likely to create a lot of heat, and that could be in the form of vegetation as well as buildings, is the third piece that we're trying to bring forward in kind of the toolbox of resources and in the vocabulary of resources. So it's more than just the hardy side, it's more than just the vegetation management. It's kind of a collection of ideas and a collection of actions. Make sense? Lose anybody? Okay. So when we look at some of the recent wildfires, and I'm just showcasing two of them tonight, and there are many replicates of this. On the left, you'll see an image from Paradise. And I don't know if there's anything that strikes you in that. So you see roads, you see trees, you see these gray things. The grays are where there were homes. But if you were to look at patterns, what do you all see when you look at this image? Where's the green?
Up at the top, that's that, yeah.
Like, so there's green here. Are there any homes around? No, there's no homes there. Where's the brown?
Around home.
Around the homes. Really, our homes are the most combustible landscape. Once you get homes engaged, then you often, it's a totally different type of fire. The vegetation really isn't what drove this fire here. It's really once we got homes ignited, that's when it became home to home spread. And it's a completely different animal to try and manage. What we saw, we did some research looking at the town of Paradise and the single family homes in Paradise. And of those buildings that survived, which are very few, 63% of them were damaged from radiant heat. So what this brings forward is this idea that there's really a community dynamic and there's a spatial dynamic. So if your neighbor's home goes, it's a high probability that your own home will be damaged or will need additional action. These are further images from Paradise. It's fall after the fire took place, I think, around November 9th. So the leaves are changing color. That's what this sort of funny different yellows and browns are. Those are leaves that have been dropped from these trees. But when I look at these images, I really see like, oh, this whole block went, but this block did not, but this one did. Right, so you can kind of see the connection and the proximity to buildings and how that affects survival. So what we saw in Paradise, 73% of homes were within 54 feet of a destroyed structure. The nearest destroyed structure was the strongest predictor of loss or failure or survival, which is, it can be sort of a defeating message at some level because your survival is very much dependent on your neighbor's survival. And we don't all get along in our neighborhoods, right? And we don't all think in the same way. So how do we overcome that? I think insurance, well, that's true. But we can lead by example, right? We can inspire others by example. And when you're out doing something, you're just like, what are you doing? Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm thinking about fire season. I'm thinking about the things that I can do. I just learned this great stuff and I think it's going to make a difference. Let's see how we do, right? You have a conversation and you create that place for dialogue. Fortunately, we've got some great, new, staffing that can help us lift this conversation. But you all and your ability to communicate this to your communities is really essential. So here's Boulder, Colorado. Doesn't quite look like Bishop, but it has some remnants of being in the plains. This is the fire that came through on December 30th, about a year ago. And we saw some earlier images around the loss patterns and the survival patterns. One of the things that strikes me is in this kind of landscape, how do you create privacy?
Fence.
Fence, right? When you live in a forested landscape, do you fence it? Or not?
You know, we don't live in one.
You don't live in one. You know, when there's a lot of natural vegetation around, you kind of use that to create privacy. But if you're just out in the plains and the wind and you need a place for your dog to be and your kids to be, you know, you create your little, your special zone. This is one of the fanciest places I have ever been. It's like a labyrinth of fences. Do you know how these homes burn? The fences. Because every one of the houses is connected by fences. They're all attached and they're all wood fences. I love wood. I'm a forester, all for wood. But what we saw is that once we had ignition in the grassland systems, the fire burned through the grass. It encountered a fence. There would be debris caught at the base of the fence because fences collect things. That debris was significant enough to ignite the fence. And the fence carried the fire to the house. House ignites. Then all of a sudden you've got construction related materials that are engaged. You've got wind behind it, and then you've got bigger embers and bigger material to move. There were no gutter fires in this situation that we could see because there really isn't this canopy of trees, but there's this labyrinth of fences. And so here's just an example of how you can see the fence line here is carrying the fire. So there's some other interesting things that I saw. Speaking of condos, so this is multifamily construction. This is brand new construction, 2020 era construction. And I've got a side-by-side comparison of some loss and some survival. The reason the homes survive is that the wind stops. Firefighters took a stand and did put everything they could. It was towards the end of the event. They used this walkway to really work off of. But you can imagine the heat load that came off of that whole line of buildings going down. And so here's brand new homes. How do they perform? Well, there's some interesting components. Anybody know what you put in a sliding glass door? What kind of glass do you put in a sliding glass door? Tempered glass. And why do you do that?
So if somebody walks through it, they don't.
Anybody ever walks through a sliding glass door? I have to admit I've done it. That's a bad idea. So it breaks differently, right? But it also handles heat differently. So you can see the sliding glass door here, which is right here. Look at all the heat it was exposed to versus the picture windows on top, which are annealed glass, less heat capacity, breaks differently. You're not going to likely walk through those little lighted windows at the top. What happens is you can see the annealed glass, which has a third less resistive properties to heat, all break, and the tempered glass does not. Pretty cool just to see that kind of one-on-one comparison. Other things that happened, the glue and the doors released, the fake brick, you know, the sort of the happy bricks, you know, those started to crumble. They couldn't handle the heat. They didn't cause combustion. It's just interesting to see how they perform. So this is a great, to me, illustration of the value of the type of glass you have in a window. So how would you apply that concept?
So if you replace all your annealed glass with tempered glass,
And why would you do that? Replacing your annealed glass with tempered glass?
to make it more fire resistant.
To make it more fire resistant, especially if you had
Neighbors.
neighbors, you had buildings that were close to each other, you had a fence line that was close to another fence line. You know, you had proximity and you couldn't manage or take away that fuel. You wouldn't have to do it everywhere, but where you could anticipate seeing that kind of heat load, you might use tempered glass. Here's sort of an example of pathways. This is a little bit of a confusing set of photos. I wish I had done more of a video in it, but I've got a home that survives, a home that is heavily damaged, and there's firefighter response on it. Otherwise, it would have been just a pile of rubble. And it took us a long time to figure out what happened. The home is stucco construction. There's a fence that is actually made of wood. It's covered in a stucco skin, but at the base of it, you can see the posts that go into the ground, and there's some like hardware cloth to prevent animals from going underneath. And what we saw is that the embers basically blew over this hard fence and then wicked flame back up at the base of the wall. Base of the wall had debris caught at it. And then on the other side of the wall was a wood fence that was creating privacy between these two buildings. And there was bender board, that's just like the kind of board you use to separate one garden bed from the other. And the fire basically worked its way through that bender board and the fence, turns a corner and then attaches to the house. And even stucco construction, the under eave area is wood. And so there's enough flame that's created that it ignites the under eave area and you get penetration into the attic. So what was the sequence there? Grass to leaves to bender board to fence to house. Is any of that manageable? Did you need the fence to connect to the house? Maybe not. Did you need the bender board to connect to the fence, which then connects to the house? Maybe, maybe not. Are those expensive things to change? No, not at all. Other couple of examples. This is vegetation close to the building, and you can see that embers, even though you have rock mulch at the base of them, are able and capable of igniting these. This is some kind of decorative conifer, and I don't remember what that plant is called. It's garbage day. Fires all start on garbage day. I just want to be clear about that. It's like the universal rule. Garbage cans always blow over, and there's just debris everywhere. So they weren't messy people, but they're garbage cans as well. So this tree actually created the same condition and caught the under eave area of the house on fire. And this plant put pressure on the vent here and had flames on the underside of the house. So those were 3 locations where basically the house all failed, even though it's stucco construction, it's relatively modern, but they were just vegetation and fuels adjacent to the building. So there are survivors and there are examples of survivors, and I just want to illustrate a few of those before I give you a little more detail. This is in Paradise, the campfire. There is not a surviving building for a mile in any direction. This building survives. It's a remodel. It comes through the new construction standards, and it tees in the new vents. So I'll show you some of these vents in a minute, but they both resist flame and embers. It's got a new roof on it. It's got nice metal gutters on it. It has a lot of cement work around the house. So there's a lot of non-combustible area around the house. This is a picture of the doormat. You can see the burn marks, so the embers were landing on that building. You know, this building took a lot of heat load. The funny thing about this building is that it has an adjacent garage to it, and that's older construction and didn't get remodeled. And there's a wall of Italian cypress right up against the garage. Single pane aluminum windows. Anybody have single pane aluminum windows still?
In my garage.
In your garage, right? Yeah. And so those cypress all catch on fire. They blast out the window of the garage, but the garage doesn't burn down. The garage doesn't burn down because the house is for sale and there's nothing in the garage. Anybody have a clean garage? I don't, right? So the more you live someplace, the more stuff you have, and it gets more complicated. But it's fun, I think, intellectually to see it's possible, right? Those are 2 sets of fires that are just horrific, and we've got examples of surviving structures in them without response. Okay. If you all are master gardeners, you've probably seen this image, and it's in the collection of our master gardener slides. This is where we've been. We've been at, yes, mow your grass, prune your trees, water your lawn, and your house is okay. Our new eyes, when we look at this, what do you see?
Your, what's that called? You know, the vegetation next to the house.
Yep, see all that dark, dense, woody vegetation? It's not so good anymore, right? It's okay if you can get a fire engine who's going to protect that structure, but if you can't, you know, there's something more challenging to work with, and you're leaving lots of chance there. Just to illustrate, we are still working on these kind of guidances. This idea that vegetation next to the house is okay is really cemented in how we think about this, but the current evidence is suggesting something totally different. So we are now moving in California to 3 defensible space zones. Here's sort of a pictorial example of that. There's a new zone which is coming on, which is representing the first 5 feet around the structure, and it will go on the books in the next year or so. It's already passed and signed by the governor, just developing the enabling regulations to go with it. So big changes are coming. It'll key in first for new construction, and then a year later, it'll be required for existing construction. So if you're thinking about a new garden project, you might want to get in front of it. Okay, good. I love how you took that just so easily. I get to work with an organization called the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, and they have the coolest lab. This is a lab that's a building, and they can throw embers at the building and test different components and see how they work. I got to travel to South Carolina this year to see it. And so I just want to show you some examples of where this work is coming from. So you can see the embers land at the base of the wall, how they spread around. So that's kind of cool. You can see how they buffer and get knocked up. Next thing I want to show you is this time lapse of we've got cedar or redwood siding, we've got wood mulch, we've got vegetation, we've got a wooden deck on one side, we have fiber cement siding on the other, we have non-combustible rock mulch, have the same wood deck. But look, in 24 seconds, we've got full penetration to the under eave area. Look at the flame bend over. Look at how big the flames are on the corner. 34 seconds. This is the kind of experience that our structures have to be able to survive. 40 seconds, we're already in the under eave area, and we've hit the gable and vent at the top here. This process happens very quickly. So if you're home, you could do something about this. The likelihood that you're home, or that it's not, as Supervisor Griffith said, 3 o'clock in the morning and an inconvenient time, is the challenge that I want people to prepare for. When I ask people where they're going to be when the wildfire starts, what's your answer? 99% of people say home, unless you work for county government, and then you say at work. Because we're always at work. We fantasize about being home. We think that we'll be home. We'll think that we'll have a few moments to do the things that are important, but in most chances you won't. Right. And so when you leave for the day or whatever it was, did you leave it in the condition you wanted? It's hard to say, right? So what can you do so you have less regret? Because the horrific experience of losing a home is not something that anyone wants to go through. The psychological toll is so significant that it's worth the investment. So what about plants? I'm here before the Native Plant Society. I'm here with the Master Gardeners, and you all are plant people. I'm a plant person. I love plants. I'm deeply committed to plants. People are looking for easy solutions in the plant space. Should we plant drought tolerant or native or pollinator friendly? Yes, you should plant drought tolerant, native, and pollinator friendly, but you should plant them in the right spaces. And the right space, in my mind, is not next to the house anymore or the outbuildings. It's a little farther away, because they're going to burn in the same way that the non-native ornamental plants will burn. So they're no superior in that space. They are good. They'd be resilient if they do burn. They will recover perhaps better, but they're just as prone to burn as the other plants are. The biggest issue is really thinking about how a plant evolves through time, what its maintenance is. We can laugh at the, who plants palms kind of concept, but this idea that, it starts out green and lush, and then the leaves senesce through time. And if you don't do something about them, they're just collecting. Here's manzanita. I don't know if you all know manzanita, but it sheds its leaves, it sheds its branches, and they just kind of sit there and they accumulate. Manzanita pruned up is really not that big of a fire risk. So, that condition changes. So in my mind, worry less about the plant list, worry more about where you plant them, think more about how you maintain them, think more about having sufficient water for what your vegetation you have is, and don't exceed that. Questions? Okay, I love how you bought that. It's great. What about slopes? Steep slopes, fire tends to burn uphill, and when it burns uphill, it preheats what's up above it. So it's getting it in more condition to burn. A lot of folks where I live, and especially around the San Francisco Bay Area, talk about deflection walls and retaining walls as being useful for trying to prevent and mitigate the fire spread. And so I just want to bring forth the idea that if you are to put a wall down slope of your home to kind of interrupt the pathway, it needs to be as high as whatever vegetation and flames that are going to come off of that. So if you put that same wall with a tall conifer system, it would have to be a really tall wall. And no one's going to do that. So planning appropriately, managing that appropriately is worth considering. And if you're building from scratch, pushing the house back a little bit so it's not having the overhanging deck over the steep slope is a great way to try and still keep the view and still keep the deck and the home. Okay. We've talked a little bit about working with neighbors, and in California, the rules are there's 3 defensible space zones, and the third one goes out to 100 feet. How many people have a property big enough that they have 100 feet? Not so many of us, right? You do not have to manage the defensible space beyond the edge of your property line. So, be aware you're not on the books for that, but you should think about how you work together as a community and how you're both sort of amplifying each other's defensible space or causing additional challenges. Make sense? So, and you'll see sort of this illustration of, well, look at this attachment of the gate. Let's change it so that it's non-combustible. And let's put something in there that won't cause the fire to wick to the house through the fence. All right. Oak fire this last year. This is kind of cool. There were 149 homes that were inspected prior to the fire. They went back and looked at how those homes did after the oak fire, and the ones that were non-compliant were 6 times more likely to be destroyed. So that's some pretty good evidence that this stuff can make a difference. I think that's pretty great. You get that, Wendy? 6 times. Okay, right. All right, anybody want to live there? What would you do in this situation?
Weed whacker?
Weed whacker, yeah, that would be a good start.
All right, chainsaw.
Chainsaw. Sign up for the alerts. Have a plan. Red flag warning days, maybe not be home. How many people know somebody that was like where they live like that? Like most of us, right? Maybe go offer to help. Like maybe they can't do it because they're not able, right? Maybe the weed whacker broke. There are many things that could be done here. Managing the fuels. The thing that worries me the most is really these built-in wood steps is what I think they are. So those are hard to manage, but you got to pick at it slowly. You got to take it on. We can prioritize that. How about this house? Can I say I'm like fully jealous? Look at that view. I don't have that view where I live.
That's a cypress.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pull up cypress
and the juniper.
and the juniper. Clean this stuff up, right? There are a lot of gaps. See this opening here? Hard to say what's going on here. Look at this transition point. I would try and seal those up with screen, at least that won't pass embers. Do I think it's a lost cause? I don't. Not at all. There are things that can be done here. And it'd be worth trying because, we all got what we got and we're not going to get any more. So let's protect what we have. How about here? Same house, both sides. I went to this house in 2021 and was a part of a Defensible Space live on camera show with the Mendocino Fire Safe Council. And it was part of their program where they try and lift people that are less able. And so it was for people with disabilities and the elderly. The guy was like 96 and pulling behind his oxygen. And, it's like your heart goes out. We did a bunch of stuff. 2 weeks later, an arsonist started a fire in the neighborhood. And his house didn't make it. This stuff's real. This was probably an old bird cage. It was screened in, and it was a great place to store chemicals and gasoline and debris and all kinds of stuff. Look how close it is to the house.
And the tree.
And the tree. This was a shed that had way too much stuff in it and had, I think, about 6 inches of separation from the house. No door that could be closed. Really easy to create ignition in those spaces. We have to help those that are least able. It kills me to know that he did make it, by the way, makes it, but he's not gonna come home to a home for a long time. All right, so I'm moving on here, wrapping up. I just want to tease you with some ideas about how the buildings themselves burn and where those weak points are. Anybody have a complex roof, a house where you've got roofing and you've got walls that intersect on the same plane? You do. And do you have leaves that collect at that transition point? No, that's brilliant. How do you do that?
Really windy.
It's really, well, maybe it's less of an issue. The challenge is that the roof has a Class A rating. It's designed to withstand fire, but the wall does not. And so if you get an ignition point there, maybe it doesn't work in your setting, but you can imagine it, especially where you've got taller trees and debris that comes down, you're asking the wall to perform as well as the roof. And can the wall perform as well as the roof? Not without some help. And this is an example of a dormer, so it would be definitely possible to improve the siding, improve the flashing there, maybe add a 1 hour fire rating to that section, because it's not a lot, right? That's quite doable. Gutters, do you guys have rain gutters here? Common?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
not. Gutters are great. Why do you have gutters on a house? Anybody know?
Keep the rain from falling in front of your door.
Well, there's that. There's a performance reason for the house too. So if you ever look at it, the roof comes off, the water comes down, it doesn't go straight down, does it? It generally angles in towards the house, and all that exposure to the lower sections of the siding get damaged over time, and you get rot in the lower portion of your siding. So the gutter is really keeping your house dry, the full walls more dry, so it's important. But there are also these great collection points, and then debris collects in those gutters, and embers collect in those gutters, and then you have the opportunity for fire at the edge of the house and the roof to edge connection point. You'll see some examples. I'll show you later how to fix that. Really easy to fix. So gutters are important, and gutter cleaning, it's really challenging. I hate it. But there are some gutter guards out there. If you're going to choose one, choose a metal one because you want it to be non-combustible, and they still take maintenance. We've talked about fence the house. How would we break that transition?
Non-combustible fence.
It's just the last 5 feet, right? Okay, here are a little confusing. These are inside your attic. This is inside the pointy part of the roof, the gable end vent. These are the under eave vents. And this is pictures that are taken from that lab in South Carolina. And the screen size is 1/4 inch size, which is big enough to allow embers to penetrate. And so those little squiggly lines are actually the embers coming through the vents. Anybody store anything in their attic? No, right? I store my children's artwork, from kindergarten and 1st grade in the attic. It's really bad. It's very bad from a fire perspective. If you get embers in your attic, you're likely to have a fire inside your attic, and then your house burns from the inside out. So what are we going to do about that? We're going to fix that. It's possible to fix that. So I have made this handy dandy brochure, which I'm going to pass out at the end of tonight, where it basically goes through all these points in your house and gives you suggestions about what you can do there and how to prioritize what you do in each of those locations. The main point is that the condition of the roof is the primary concern. And why is the roof the most important part?
Going to get the most embers.
The largest horizontal surface on the building. So it's the collection point. It shoulders all the wind, all the hail, all the snow, all the rain, and all the other exposure types. I used to give these talks, and I would explain that I had a 55, 60-year-old redwood shake roof, and that I was really like the plumber with a leaking faucet. It was a totally horrific example of what to do and what not to do. But when you have an old roof, it's expensive to replace. So be aware that that roof is really what's driving your survivability. Maybe you can't afford it. I had to refinance my house to take care of that. It was expensive. So there are other things to work on. But in that top bin, it's really the roof, the vents, and then those vegetation right around the house. And when buildings get closer to each other or neighborhoods get denser, then the windows become more critical in that space. The siding can become more critical in that space. Kind of depends on the situation that you're in. We talked about vents here. If you go back and look at your house in the morning, you'll probably look at the foundation vents and you'll see they have this kind of wide screen there. the vents are important for circulation. You need to get the moisture out. It's important for that. But what we're recommending is that you add an additional layer of protection with 8-inch metal mesh screen, which can be added on. You can take your existing vents and upgrade them.
Can you use aluminum mesh or does it have to be steel?
I would use aluminum.
Yeah, it melts too quick. Right?
Yeah, it melts too quickly. There's a whole new selection of vents. So there's new technology out there. And these are designed to resist both flames and embers. So some of them have an intumescent coating on them. I love that word. Cool word. I call it the marshmallow effect. You put a marshmallow in the fire, it smolders, it sears up, it turns black, and then it goes out. So what happens with these mesh, that intumescent paint, is that when it gets heat load on it, it swells up and it seals all the holes and it shuts itself down. We've got an automatic safety shutdown system like a marshmallow. There's through roof vents. They have a steel mesh, steel wool that goes through them. This is my favorite style. It has a tortured path. It's like an under hood over your a stove kind of setup. If you have one of those fancier hoods, you've ever seen them, if you take it down and the oil and the smoke go up through that. That works the best, and I'll show you why, because my son and I had a great science fair experiment and we tested all these different things. This is how that Vulcan vent seals up. You can see how messy it gets. It's really nasty. It smells really bad when it does that. What we did is we shook embers going down horizontally and had a newspaper underneath, and if they passed through and ignited the newspaper, we did the timer on that and see how it is both sealing and it is still letting through little bits of ember underneath. It was super fun, right? Can you imagine having me as a parent? So cool. Just kidding. All right. Here's a brand new home built to the highest construction standards, but then they over landscaped it. And what happened in this case is lots of combustible mulch around this house in Paradise. These are the sides of the embers. You can see all the melt on their back patio cushions. Each one of these windows has a first pane breakage. The house survives. First pane breakage bad? Yes and no. I mean, there's a bunch of work to be done. But had they not had all of that combustible mulch and woody vegetation, there probably would have been no damage to that house except for maybe some smoke damage. So it's possible to take it to the next level. And this, reflects that we didn't really understand when they built that home, the importance of that first zone 0. So now it's interesting when you order windows, you can get first pane, second pane, tempered, annealed. You can switch it around. Most folks in California are now selling just both panes tempered, so it's even better. They're more expensive, but not exceedingly more expensive. So I'm just wrapping up here. We've done some more experiments with gates and fences, and just to show there's lots of cool stuff coming where we get to burn stuff and then figure out how far the flame goes. And sure enough, if you put something metal there, it stops. There are other places on the home to think about: pet doors, little cute doggy doors, places like here is maybe someone's non-roll-up garage door. There's like a door, a funky old garage, but you get some rot over time and you get some degradation, and then the leaves collect there. Anybody have an old building that looks like that? Yeah, right. So that's where the embers are going to go. Time for a little flashing. Time for a little cleanup in those locations. Anybody store their broom outside? So I have a cabin which has to, fend for itself in the summer, and I bring in my broom. I bring in my doormat when I leave. I'm only there certain time periods. I think about how I button up that house before I walk away. I have a front door that is a nice, beautiful wood door. Doesn't quite have the weather stripping it needs, and so I put some foil face tape at the base of my door when I leave for 2 weeks. That may sound insane, but with the August fire that came within 5 miles to my cabin, when I came back several weeks after the fire had been extinguished, there was this giant plume of ash underneath my front door. So it was cold ash that hit my house, but it was a good recognition of like, oh, that's where the dirt goes in, that's where the embers go in. thankfully that house was far away. Oops. Oh, that's really weird. Okay. Okay, as I wrap up, anybody feel like we've given any tips here?
Yeah.
No. It's about putting the pieces together, right? It's not about one single building product. It's not about just because I have a metal roof, I'm fine. It's not about just because I have stucco, I'm fine. It's really about thinking in a systems framework, thinking about both the design, the installation, and the maintenance, and then how the potential exposures may be for your structure and bolstering those situations. Poor installation, just as troublesome as a good product. You know, it will reduce the value of a good product. So there are lots of things that you all can do, and I just want to, leave you with this idea that there is reason for hope, and there is, essentially a predictable pattern for failure. Because if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we're not going to see a different result. But I think we're getting enough evidence here to sort of start to put the pieces together to understand what the vulnerabilities are in our individual structures and what actions we can start to take. When you think about it, with tornadoes and earthquakes and hurricanes, do we fight those? No, we don't. We adapt and we build smarter, right? We brace and bolt program, we strap our water tanks down. There's additional things you can do in how your roof is constructed to make a difference. We make sure we're on perimeter foundations. We've adapted to earthquakes. We can do the same when it comes to wildfire. And with that, I just want to conclude with saying there's a whole lot of resources available, and a lot of them are on the back table. And I brought some handy dandy brochures that are sort of the nice succinct way to look at these issues. And you're welcome to take anything you'd like here. And I'm happy to wrap it up or take some questions. We can probably ask some questions through the chat. And with that, thank you for my rocky start, and I appreciate being with you all tonight.
So we use swamp coolers to cool our houses here, which means you have to leave the window open,
Right,
and the windows open are bad.
right.
So is there like?
Meaning because you have to lift it partway up to the swamp cooler.
No. So then you have to have airflow.
Okay, so then you should screen that airflow.
Is there like a screen, a window screen that doesn't let the fire in?
Yeah, certainly. I remember my college dorm. They didn't have window screens, but you could put the little one in and it expanded and contracted, and it was a metal screen. You can buy this at the hardware store.
Okay.
Yeah, you could make one,
And sealed,
Yeah, like you lift the window up and you pull it out, like it slides and will fit a wide window, a skinny window. They're metal, but you could build one.
Could you talk about decks a little bit and what, how to make them safer? What's the best material to have decks made of, and how to keep stuff from going underneath it that's flammable?
Yeah, we should spend like an hour
I
together.
know.
I love decks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a deck now?
Yeah.
Just one?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about my dad's house.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have like
Just one.
three decks. It's
3 decks. Okay,
lot
good.
of
All right. Now I'm talking to my people here.
decks.
So what's underneath the deck? Big slope?
Just ground, there's the crawl space, you access the crawl space, and then there's just open area for skunks to come in. Weeds to gather and weeds and they're wood.
Right.
Wood decks.
Right.
So replacing them with Trex or anything like that.
No, wood is combustible, that's true. But you can manage a lot of the vulnerabilities of the decks themselves. If you're building new, you have a lot more opportunities. The maintenance piece is particularly challenging because you need gaps so that the water goes through, but then the birds drop seeds, and so you kind of need a regular way to get underneath the deck. If the deck area is really visible, that's tricky. Where I live, you sneeze on something and something grows. Like there's just this perpetual grass challenge. I've done this kind of hokey thing for my deck, where my house is in a sea of grass, and I found a bunch of old metal roofing, and I laid that underneath the deck, and it's really prevented the grass growth. And it's brown and it kind of blends in. So I'm putting that in like the thinking box, you know, because you could do some kind of weed barrier and then gravel underneath it. Where I live, I'm gonna get blackberries in that before I know it, and then it's even worse because they have so much I'm trying to pull. Some people seal the bases of their decks. That helps with the skunks. But remember, you need airflow, so you're gonna have to build in ventilation underneath it, which is okay if you can manage that. There is a brochure over there around decks and how to build new decks, and there's some kind of cool, cheap innovations. So you have deck joists, and then you have deck boards, and typically the joists go perpendicular to the house, and then the deck boards go parallel. So you can get ignition through the gaps on the deck joists, and then the fire will wick towards the house. So the solution is foil-faced metal tape, and you can, this is the joist, you can cap it with that tape. We're talking like $10 worth of tape for an average size deck. And then if you increase the gap between the deck boards to that 1/4 inch, it prevents the smoldering, both between boards and then along that board surface. If you've ever tried to take a deck board off, I generally end up breaking this through, and then I'm just miserable and grumpy. So it's a little hard to retrofit that stuff in. But if you're building new, you can use that system. You can also take the last 2 deck boards off and put a non-combustible piece in there. And there's some, especially like where you have a lot of snow, you'll see people with their steps are metal and they're graded, and you could put those in for the last 2 boards.
The last 2 closest to the
The
house.
house, yeah. So if you get ignition, then at least maybe run into something that's less likely. I like a little bigger gap than the average person because it's just easier to clean. And the stuff that gets stuck in there is, you know, really hard to get out. So I think about, you know, it's not the deck's fault. It's mostly our behavioral challenges and being able to manage it. So what we store on it, what we store underneath it, and how we maintain it. I think the stair landings are particularly vulnerable because they tend to go down to the, you know, to the debris level. So if I've been actually using some more of that metal behind the deck, behind the steps, you know, just kind of clean it out and keeps the grass from growing. I have some of those little metal hoop hose. Those kind of work pretty good to keep the grass out. It's a pain, but it's worth it to me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling very optimistic about
Okay.
living in a mobile home park
Mm.
because we don't do well with any kind of calamity.
It is true. It is true. And the issue is really about,
Neighbors.
it's about density, right? There's so many and you don't tend to have, the foundations don't have to be so robust for mobile homes. Paradise is a terrific example in the calamities for mobile home parks.
Just wasted.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many of them there. Paris is really a low income community overall. My colleagues and I are spending a lot of time like, I don't know what to recommend in this space. I think I would apply the same concepts.
Yeah.
You want to keep, you know, you want to seal all those gaps. You want to keep fire from underneath your building. If you could harden those windows, it'd probably be better.
Yeah.
Whether that's possible or not, I think talking as a community about the additional vulnerabilities, you only have so much space, right? So we tend to collect and put stuff in our spaces.
With the mobile home too, because they are so close, but also so your next door neighbor's home goes. With the metal siding, does that, you know, just radiate more heat into the structural?
It's a question I've been wondering about. I don't know the answer to it exactly. I'd like to sort of think about the physics that are in that wall construction there. We need to do some experiments and think about what goes down first in that setting.
And have some education as a mobile home community.
Right, because there's also some plastic detailing that there's just a different set of products there, and we just haven't tackled that yet. But same concepts, alerts, paying attention, situational awareness.
Yeah.
I mean, great story. I met a woman in Paradise, and she said her husband was a physician, and she was doing the school drop off. She drops off her son. Carpool. Other parent drops off her son. She's about to drop off her daughter. Son starts calling. He's in junior high, and she's like, "Oh, good gosh, you just trying to get out of school? Like, what's going on here?" And then she starts to realize, well, maybe this is a fire. And so she goes and talks to the neighbor. They go pick up their kids. They come back to the house and they figure they have the 6-hour plan to execute. You know, so pack up the turtle, you know, all the other important things, take your time. About 6 minutes into it, she walks outside and she sees all the birds leaving. And she goes, okay, 6-minute plan. And they walk out and they leave. Right? She had situational awareness enough to recognize that there was a natural signal saying that this is far worse than what anyone had been reporting, and figured out how to get out of there. So that's another important piece.
You know, it just occurred to me, we have one exit out of the mobile home park with.
Right. With hundreds of people.
Crap.
Yeah.
Did they had a conversation though, that you can go out the back gate.
If you ram it, I mean, it's locked. But yeah,
But this is a great point for conversations. There's a lot of emergency options that can be created, and a system that you could practice to sort of say who does what, when, and where, and how to approach it. But I do think you have more vulnerability than the average home. So, but do follow up, because I do want to work on that. Anybody online?
Yeah, one person would like to know where to get the brochures, because they're not here in person.
That's not here in person. So you all could, Kristen can send them out. All of the things that I presented today are free downloadable links, and you can make it happen.
And then for the tour tomorrow, where do we? The address is 270 North CD Lane.
270 North CV Lane, and we're meeting at 10 o'clock at the. There's a building, right? It's called something.
Building, but I don't know what it's called.
Is that
it's the elder.
is it the elders or is it the cultural center?
No, it's. Wait, they're meeting at the Central Center, or
What's the address?
No.
270 CD.
So my plan tomorrow, while these guys figure out the address, is to go look at some houses and apply some of the concepts and walk around some buildings and talk about where we start, how to recognize some of the vulnerabilities, and just have conversation around what we should do in these situations. You know, it's not about poking fingers at anybody. We all have stuff to learn, and every home presents an interesting opportunity for dialogue and conversation. The formula is sometimes the same, but sometimes it's not. So applying this, I think, will really make the transition from like, oh, I heard a lot of cool things, but I don't really know what to do with it yet. So it's a lot more fun to go out and look at that. So that's what I intend to do tomorrow. And I don't know, it'll be less than 2 hours or so, and happy to like explore more with your questions. If anybody wanted to bring photographs of their house and say, what should I do here? I'd be happy to look at them and we could talk it through.
It's next to Toyabe.
The
You park at Toyabe or the building right next to Toyabe.
administrative building?
Well, there's the USDA just across the street.
No, where the medical is.
So the medical's on one side and administrative is the other building, they're attached.
Okay,
That building
give us a second here. I'm going to answer another question. You guys work it out. Okay.
That's Toyabe.
Oh, okay.
So using wood chips for your garden is not a bad idea. Using wood chips for your garden right next to your house is a bad idea.
How many feet away from the house?
5.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
But I was gonna get a truckload of.
Wood chips?
Like a.
Uh-huh.
I put it in the back about 30 feet back.
Mhm.
But it's gonna take a while to spread around, and it's gonna be a mountain.
Right, it's going to be a mountain. Yep,
So that's a bad idea.
it's a bit of a bad idea. Yeah, yeah. It's a bad, good idea, right? It's recycling, it's reusing a product, you know, it's creating a way to mulch, it's creating a way to create, you know, reduce weeds, to manage water loss, all those things. Chips do burn and they do blow around. So, you know, I think about
Gravel can do a lot of the same good things.
gravel can do a lot of the same things. It also can take on more heat too, and that can be a bit of an issue. So I'm not anti-wood chip. It's just being thoughtful about where you're going to get exposure. Maybe if it's not on the wind side necessarily, if there is more of a wind side, if you can incorporate them in and get some more mineral soil in there, so they make more of a dense bed.
What I saw up at the our round fire, I had a friend who had a pretty new house that survived, but she had new plantings. And so they had these little seeds, you know, trees, they weren't very big, and they'd mulched all those with wood chips. And then there were native plants out there that of course were ignored. The native plants survived. All those trees burned right at the base because the embers fell right in the wood chips. The trees are still standing and, you know, posted out on their strings and stuff, but yeah, the wood chips did them in.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue is that the wood chips will smolder for a longer time period. So if you really think there's a high probability of wildfire exposure, thinking about what you plant around them, there's a specimen perfect tree that you really want to keep. Maybe you don't want a lot of heat load on that tree. Dustin, you could agree with me.
Well, the trade-off would be then the tree cooks in the summer.
The tree cooks in the sun. Yep,
Travel.
There's not really a good answer.
White here.
yeah,
Our gravel is white.
yeah. This is the fun, you get to experiment. What I want to say, respected to that new zone, like, how do you tackle that? I'm assuming majority of you are kind of do-it-yourselfers. You do the stuff yourself. A friend of mine was trying to employ this, and he came to this conclusion that you start on the side of your house that you care the least about. Because it's taken him a couple rounds to get good at the aesthetics and the function. And the first round, he's like, yeah, that was Gen 1. I don't really like how that worked out. And the place that matters the most, I should put my energy into, but he needed some time to get good at it. He's got some cool, like, thick steel, which he's bent and created little islandy sections, like a fender board out of this thick steel. You know, he's got the decomposed granite, which is working in and making the trails, and it looks great now. And I understand what he meant by first gen, not so good. Could also be that you work on the side where you get the most wind or the most exposure, because that's the highest priority in your mind. Like, you don't have to do it all in the first year. All right, shall we wrap it up?
So we're meeting on TV at 10 tomorrow?
Yes.
At that other building.
And did you write that into the chat?
Yeah.
The address.
Okay.
Environmental science building, but
Where do you?
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And you
Appreciate
guys
the
have
invitation.
cookies over there if you need some sustenance to get you home.